नमस्कार, वेलकम टू कलाम आईएएस। दिस इज वासुदेव सिंह भाटी और आज का जो हमारा सेशन है दिस इज गोइंग टू बी अबाउट इंटरिम बजट ऑफ 24-25। नाउ वी ऑल नो दैट दिस इज अ ईयर ऑफ इलेक्शन और जिस साल इलेक्शन होता है दैट ईयर द गवर्नमेंट डज नॉट प्रेजेंट द फुल बजट, क्योंकि नेक्स्ट बजट लाने की जो जिम्मेदारी है, द रिस्पॉन्सिबिलिटी ऑफ प्रेजेंटिंग द फुल बजट is of the new government which will be formed after the election. So this year there is just interim budget. So first of all, there is not much, there are not many schemes in interim budget. The government, stays relatively reluctant. They do not propose new schemes or no major changes are made in taxation or other government policies, fiscal policies. So we saw the similar trends in this year's interim budget also. So as a result, there is not much data, not much content in this year's interim budget for the purpose of UPSC Prelims. So what we are going to do is we are going to look at the fundamentals of the budget, like what is a budget and how the UPSC frames questions around those fundamentals and those concepts of the budget. And apart from that, the important data, important graphs that are there in this budget, we will also look at them. Now, again, in today's class also, our approach is going to be the same as it was in the yesterday's class, that we will not try to memorize any facts, we will not try to memorize any figures, because UPSC does not ask the factual question, especially about the data of the budget. They will ask about the trends, like fiscal deficit is increasing or decreasing, or revenue deficit is more than fiscal deficit or not, or they will ask conceptual question. For example, which of the following are part of capital expenditure or capital budget of the government of India, or which of the following will result into increase in fiscal deficit, or what is the definition of revenue deficit. So such questions are asked in the UPSC prelims, which are either conceptual in nature or which represent long-term trends, and that is how we are going to look at this year's budget. So first of all, what is the budget? Budget is an estimate of future receipts and expenditure of a particular period. For example, this year's budget, this shows 1 year future expenditure and receipts, but the vote on account budget this year that has been done is for 4 months only. Vote on account is a bill passed in the parliament to ensure that the government can take money out of consolidated fund of India. So we know there are two funds, consolidated fund of India and public accounts. Now this budget includes both sources as well as uses of the funds, and this budget is prepared by Department of Economic Affairs, Ministry of Finance. Ministry of Finance के अंदर एक department है, Department of Economic Affairs, that presents the budget. UPSC has asked a question in previous year that this particular departments prepare budget of the government of India. So department के ऊपर question पूछा हुआ है. That is why it is important to know the Department of Economic Affairs prepares the budget. Department of Economic Affairs, Ministry of Finance prepares the budget. And one more statement that was given in that question was no amount can be withdrawn by the government or the executive from the consolidated fund of India without prior approval of parliament. तो parliament का approval होता है, vote on account होता है parliament के अंदर. तो vote on account के अंदर parliament approve करती है that this much amount of money you can take out of consolidated fund of India. So there is again a UPSC PYQ has been asked on this statement. So that is why this statement is here. And there is one more account, which is public account. Public account is operated by executive government. So public account is something out of which government of India can take money without taking approval of the parliament. So this is some conceptual things about the budget around which UPSC has asked questions before, so we should know about them. Now, as we all know, in budget there are two parts. One is receipt and other is expenditure. One is receipt and other is expenditure. Now in receipts, there are two types of receipts. Receipts is what the government gets, how, from where and how much money the government gets becomes part of the receipts of the government, and the whatever government spends for its own policies, that becomes part of government expenditure. Now in receipts, there are two types of receipts. One is revenue receipts and other is capital receipts. Now UPSC has already asked the questions upon capital account, like there were 4 options, and UPSC asked which of the following are part of capital account. Now if you look at the budget, we will look at the document budget at a glance. in which there are a lot of things given around in the capital account and revenue account. What becomes part of revenue account, what becomes part of capital account, capital expenditure, capital receipts, revenue expenditure, revenue receipts. So you do not again have to memorize every item in that list. What you have to do is to ensure that you know the conceptual difference between revenue and capital. In revenue receipts, revenue receipts are the one which are recurring in nature. What does recurring mean? Recurring mean which is repeated year after year, or in other words, revenue on capital, the difference between revenue and capital is that revenue receipts do not affect assets and liabilities of the government, whereas capital account affect the assets and liabilities of the government, and it is non-recurring in nature. For example, a father says to his son that go son, earn some money, and son goes to the market, sells the jewelry from the house. He sells his mother's jewelry in the market and bring home some money, and says to the father, you see, you asked me to earn some money and I earned some money. Has he really earned some money? No. What he has done, that he has sold assets of the household and converted those into cash. That is what is essentially capital account. Now, capital account includes two types of receipts. One is debt creating and other is non-debt creating. One is debt creating and other is non-debt creating. So before talking about capital account, we have understood that capital account is something which affects assets and liabilities of the government. So revenue account are the one which do not affect assets and liabilities of the government, which are pure earning for the government. Now, what is a pure earning? The son, instead of selling jewelry, the son, what he could have done was he could have gone and had a job. Now, if that person has a job, now the income from the job, is it recurring in nature or is it non-recurring in nature? It is recurring in nature. Or in other words, what he could have done, he could have rented out some property, to give some property on rent. If the person is earning rental income, that is again a recurring income, because that comes year after year and that does not affect assets and liabilities of the household. Similarly, the receipts of the government, revenue receipts, are the one which do not affect assets and liabilities of the government. So in revenue receipts, there are two types of receipts. One is taxes and other is non-taxes. In taxes, it is simple. Whatever the taxes and duties that the government of India collects becomes part of tax receipts. Now tax receipts, GST हो गया, income tax हो गया, या फिर corporate tax हो गया, duties हो गया, excise duty हो गया. So these are all part of taxes. What are the non-tax revenue receipts? Non-tax revenue receipts are the one which the government of India earns money without affecting the assets and liabilities. For example, dividend. For example, RBI transfers certain sum of money every year to government of India. Now, when RBI transfers it, that becomes part of revenue receipts, because that does not affect ownership of government of India over RBI. RBI जो है उसकी 100% ownership government of India की ही है. But when the RBI transfers money, that does not affect ownership of the government of India over RBI. That is why that is part of revenue receipts, and RBI can continue to do so without affecting ownership of government of India over RBI for n number of years. RBI has been doing it since independence. So dividends, profit, interest on loan, if the government of India has given loan to someone and earning interest on that amount, is part of revenue receipts, whereas recovery of loan itself is part of capital receipt. So in revenue receipts, there are two types of receipts. One is taxes, other is non-taxes. Taxes, it's very simple, we all know. In non-taxes, we will classify those revenue receipts which do not affect assets and liabilities, which are recurring in nature, which can happen every month or every year without affecting the total assets owned by the government. For example, dividend हो गया, profit from public sector enterprises, if any public sector enterprises that transfers money to the government of India, that is part of dividend. Or government provided certain services, for example, administrative services, police services, on which they charge certain amount of money, and whatever money they charges to the people, that becomes again part of revenue receipts of the government of India. We will see there are administrative receipts that are part of revenue receipts in the budget at a glance document. We will see the document in detail also. Now, next part is capital receipts. अब capital receipts क्या होता है? Again, which affect assets and liabilities of the government. So in capital receipts, there are two types of receipts. One is debt creating capital receipts, other is non-debt capital receipts. Now, debt, what does debt means? Debt means to have loan. Debt का मतलब होता है उधारी. Debt का मतलब होता है उधारी. So the debt is the one which is increases loan for the government of India. Now, if the government of India borrows money from the market, internal market or external market, if government of India borrows money from the market, then that becomes part of capital receipts, which are debt creating in nature. Or in the other terms of capital receipts is non-debt capital receipts. Now, in non-debt capital receipts, what government of India does is they sell their assets, or they recover the loan given already to the people. So, for example, if government of India gives you 100 rupees loan, if government of India gives you 100 rupees loan, rupees 100 loan to you, and at the rate of 10% per annum, rupees 100 loan at the rate of 10% per annum. Now, after 1 year, I repay the loan to the government. How much money I will pay? I will pay 110 rupees. 100 rupees is principal and 10 rupees is interest. This is interest. Now, we have seen that the interest that the government of India earns on the loan that it has given becomes part of revenue receipts. Interest on loan is part of revenue receipts. But the principal, the recovery of loan is part of capital receipts. So, if the government of India gives you 100 rupees and takes back 110 rupees next year, the 100 rupees that the principal amount is part of capital receipts. And the interest that the government of India has earned from this lending, that is 10%, is part of revenue receipts. Why? Because it affects assets and liabilities of the government. This does not affect assets and liabilities of the government. This is recurring in nature. For example, if you do not pay money in next year, what you have to do is you have to pay the interest for sure. You pay your interest every year until you have the capacity to repay principal also. So interest is earned every year. That's the profit. जो भी profit होता है वो revenue receipts का part होता है. Capital receipts again two types, debt creating and non-debt creating. Debt creating क्या हो गया? जो लोन गवर्नमेंट ऑफ इंडिया लेती है बोरोविंग्स के थ्रू, गवर्नमेंट सिक्योरिटी, ट्रेजरी बिल्स हो गया, तो वो डेट क्रिएटिंग होता है. और नॉन डेट कैपिटल रिसीट्स क्या हो गया? अगर गवर्नमेंट ने पहले से कोई लोन दे रखा था जो उसने रिकवर किया है, द लोन दैट हैज रिकवर्ड, दैट द गवर्नमेंट ऑफ इंडिया हैज रिकवर्ड. एंड अदर इज selling of assets. You must have heard the term disinvestment. So government of India from time to time they sell their shares in their public sector enterprises. For example, LIC के shares भी government of India ने sell किए थे, news में था काफी. So whenever government of India disinvest, what does disinvest mean? Disinvest means is government of India is selling its ownership. When government of India sells its ownership over any public sector enterprise, now what is it affecting assets and liabilities of the government of India? Yes, it is affecting assets of the government, and as a result it becomes part of capital receipts. So government of India, the disinvestment receipts is part of capital receipts. So we have understood till now that in budget there is receipts. The receipts is the money that the government of India is receiving from different sources. Receipts, there are two parts, revenue receipts and capital receipts. In revenue receipts again there are two parts, taxes and non-taxes. Revenue receipts, all the revenue receipts are recurring in nature. They do not affect assets and liabilities of the government. So revenue receipts are of two types, taxes and non-taxes. What does non-taxes include? Dividend, profit, interest on loan. So whatever profit that government of India earns, whatever the service charges that government of India does, charges on the people, is part of revenue receipts. And capital receipts is the one which is non-recurring in nature, which affect assets and liabilities of the government of India. Now these again are of two types, debt creating and non-debt creating. Debt creating means which the government of India borrows from market or outside, and non-debt creating are the one which is not part of borrowings but that affect assets and liabilities of the government. For example, government of India has given a loan to someone and they recover the loan, the principal amount becomes part of capital receipts. Or government of India sells its own assets. For example, they disinvest in certain public sector enterprises, that becomes part of capital receipts. Okay. Now going to the expenditure. Expenditure again is of two types, revenue expenditure and capital expenditure. The definition between revenue and capital remains the same, whether it is receipts or is it expenditure. The definition of revenue and capital remains the same. Revenue receipts are the one which do not create assets, which do not affect assets and liabilities of the government, and revenue expenditure are the one which do not create assets, and capital expenditure are the one which create assets. Now revenue expenditure के अंदर क्या क्या आएगा? For example, जो grants government of India देती है, government of India gives grants in aid. For example, the government of India gives grants to the government of Rajasthan. Now that will become part of revenue expenditure, because that the government of India will never receive it back. Similarly, if there is any interest expenditure that the government of India is doing, government of India has taken a loan. Now we know taking loan and repaying loan or recovery of loan, all that becomes part of capital account. But the interest part, interest on loan, whether the government of India is receiving it or the government of India is paying it, that become part of revenue account. Now when the government of India receives it, it becomes part of revenue receipts. When government of India is paying interest on any loan that it has taken, that becomes part of revenue expenditure. So we know interest is part of revenue. There are more expenditure. There are administrative expenses, the subsidies that the government of India gives, the salaries that the government of India gives to its employees. Everything is part of revenue expenditure because that is not creating any assets. Now what does capital expenditure means? The expenditure which creates assets for the government of India or which reduces liabilities of the government of capital expenditure which reduces liabilities of the government of India. For example, if government of India spends some money on building an airport or a railway station or roads or ship ports, so all these are creating assets, and these assets will continue to give return to the government of India and the Indian economy for years to come. Now that is why the expenditure that creates assets become part of capital expenditure. Capital expenditure, the government of India and the Indian economy will continue to reap their benefit for years to come, and that is why we say that increase in capital expenditure is a good news. Whenever government of India increases expenditure on capital assets, that is the good news, because that affects the economic health over a long period of time. Now what are the capital expenditure that the government of India does? One is infrastructure. Whatever the government of India spends on building infrastructure, now is that creating asset? Yes, that is creating assets. That is why that is part of capital expenditure. Other is loans repaid. Now whenever the loans are repaid, that reduces the liability of the government of India. Whatever affect assets and liabilities of the government of India becomes part of capital account. Now whenever government of India repays the any loan that it has already taken, the principal amount of loan becomes part of capital expenditure. In this example again we can see that in this example again we can see that you take it other way around. You have given 100 rupees to the government of India at the rate of 10%, and government of India repays it back after 1 year 110 rupees to you. What does it reflect in the expenditure account? How does it reflect in the expenditure account? The 10 rupees that the government of India is paying, that is interest. That interest becomes part of revenue expenditure, and the 100 rupees that the government of India is paying you, that becomes part of capital expenditure, because that is reducing the liabilities of the government of India. So we will just again, you take screenshot of this chart, or you make it in your own copy, so that you can revise it again and again, and you can have conceptual clarity over what includes capital expenditure, what includes revenue expenditure, what is part of capital receipts, what is part of revenue receipts. Because UPSC has already asked you questions. For example, this was the question asked in 2016, if I am not wrong. This is the question of 2016, which asked which of the following are included in the capital budget of the Government of India. Now you try to solve this question as we read it. Which of the following part of capital budget? Now capital budget will include both the things, capital expenditure as well as capital receipts. Now the capital budget, first is expenditure on acquisition of assets like roads, building, machinery. Now we know whatever affects the assets and liabilities of the Government of India becomes part of capital account. So capital budget का part क्या है? Expenditure on acquisition of assets and like roads. Yes, that is part of capital budget. Statement first is part of capital budget. Second is loans received from the foreign government. Again, loans received from the foreign governments, that is debt creating capital receipts for the Government of India. That is why it is also part of capital budget. Third is loans and advances granted to states and union territories. Now the Government of India has given loan to someone, that is also affecting assets and liabilities of the Government of India. Giving loan to someone is an asset for the Government of India. Now because the Government of India will receive that money back. The aids that the Government of India, the grants in aids that the Government of India gives to the states, that is revenue expenditure. But loan that the Government of India gives to the states, part of capital expenditure. So loan and advances granted to the states and union territories, this is also a part of capital expenditure. So answer to this question is D. Now looking at the budget of last year and this year's budget, we will have certain inferences from it, and you please note down whatever I am talking about in the next few slides, because there are not many things to look at in these graphs, but there are certain inferences. First is that in last year's budget and this year's budget, both years' budget, the largest source for the Government of India, the largest source of receipts for the Government of India is borrowings. Last year the borrowings were 34%. Last year the borrowings were 34%, and this year the borrowings are 28%. So first inference is the first inference you make out of is this, that the borrowings is the largest source of receipts for the Government of India. Second is the borrowings have reduced from 34% to 28% of the budget, from 34% to 28%. So borrowings have reduced as part of budget. The second that you should observe is that last year, after borrowings and liabilities, GST was the second largest source of receipts for the Government of India. GST was the second largest source of receipts for the Government of India, but this year the income tax has overtaken GST. Last year income tax was 15%, GST was 17%. This year income tax is 19%, GST is 18%. So it has happened after a lot of years. From past 4-5 years, GST has always been higher than income tax and corporate tax individually, not combined. Income tax and corporate tax combined are much more than GST, but individually GST has always been the largest source of revenue for the Government of India. But this year income tax is more than, income tax collection is more than GST, and fourth number is corporate tax. Corporation tax is fourth number. The first is borrowings and liabilities, second is income tax, third is GST, fourth is corporate tax. You don't have to remember exact amount like how much percentage this is. You should have certain idea that borrowings and liabilities are a little more than 1/4. 25% से थोड़ा ज्यादा है, 27-28% के आसपास है. So you should know कि 25 से 30% के आसपास में कुछ borrowings and liabilities है. Income tax is around 20% के आसपास, 20% से थोड़ा कम है, 19. और फिर उससे कम जीएसटी और उससे कम कॉर्पोरेट्स है. रेस्ट ऑफ दी रेस्ट ऑल you don't have to memorize them. If you can, you can, but you don't have to. UPSC has never asked a question on this. Even if UPSC frames a question on this, they will frame question on certain important parameters. For example, income tax, GST, borrowings and liabilities, and not on the things like non-debt capital receipts or customs or non-tax receipts. All right. So these are the three inferences. First is that borrowings and liabilities is the biggest source of receipts. Looking at individually, we will also see that the tax revenue is the largest source of receipts apart from borrowings and liabilities. But when you divide all the taxes, when you distinguish between different taxes, is then from a single source, if we talk about from a single source of all the sources that the government of India has, borrowings and liabilities is the single largest source of receipts. Second is income tax, third is GST, fourth is corporation tax. From past few years, GST was higher than income tax, but this year income tax has overtaken GST. So these are the 3 points that you should know about. Next, looking at the expenditure profile of the government of India. Now, this is again last year's budget, this is this year's budget. Where does rupees go to? Last year also and this year also, interest payment has remained the largest destination for the government of India. This is the largest expenditure for the government of India. Last year also interest payment was the highest at 20%. This year also interest payment is the highest at 20%. This is the first inference from these graphs. Again, you can have take a screenshot. So you don't have to memorize any of the figures. You just memorize, okay, interest payment is around 20%. Even if UPSC frames a conceptual factual question around it, they will give some data which is very easy to refute. For example, they might say interest payment is 50% of the total budget. Now at that time, someone who has not looked at the pie chart might take wrong statement in this, or UPSC might give that interest payment is just 5% of the total budget or 3.2% of the total budget. So interest payment is around 20%, 1/5 of the total budget. You should have certain idea. Okay, it's around 1/5, 20% interest budget. Second number is state shares of taxes and duties. That is also 20%. That but in second decimal point, that is lower than interest payment. So interest payment is more than state's share of taxes and duties. So after interest payment, second number is state share of taxes and duties, and third number is central sector schemes. These are the only 3 ranks that you should remember. First is interest payment, second is state share of taxes and duties, third number is central sector schemes. Apart from that, you don't have to memorize that how much percentage are there in which of the following expenditure. You just look at the first top 2-3 contributors and first top 2-3 destinations and look at major changes that have happened in this budget. When we talk about expenditure, there are not many major changes happening this year. So that's more than enough from this slide. Now allocation to specific ministry. Again, this is not very useful data for prelims. Only thing that you should know is Ministry of Defence has the highest budget, that is 6.2 lakh crore, and next is Ministry of Road, that is less than half of the Ministry of Defence. Apart from that, you should know the rankings. Ministry of Defence first, second is Ministry of Road, third is Ministry of Railways. After that, you don't have to memorize it. This is the only thing that you have to memorize. Again, you don't have to memorize what is the exact budget of Ministry of Defence. What you have to have is certain idea what is, okay, it is around 6 lakh crore and it is less than 3 lakh crore. Ministry of Road. That's more than enough to solve any factual question also that UPSC might ask on the allocations to different ministries. Again, UPSC has not asked allocations, but you should have certain idea. Again, these data can be very useful in your answer writing. When you do mains answer writing, then these data can be useful. In prelims, this is not of very much use. This is just given for your reference. So Ministry of Defence is the highest. It is more than double the second number, which is Ministry of Road, and third number is Ministry of Railways. That's it. Now talking about receipts and expenditure. First is receipts. Now there are 2 types of receipts we have already seen in the graphs. First is capital receipts and other is revenue receipts. The revenue receipts, these two graphs are of the same year. First is budgeted estimate, second is revised estimates. So we will not look at the budgeted estimates, we will just look at the revised estimates. So revenue receipts were 23.8, then 27, then 30. So revenue receipts are increasing, are in a increasing trend. And capital receipts, again, this is budgeted estimate, this is revised estimate. So this one is more real. This is, we will not consider this one. Now, in capital receipts, the in 22-23, the capital receipts were 18.1, which reduced to 17.9, and this year these are budgeted to reduce to 17.6. So we know that revenue receipts, कि अगर कोई लड़का जाके नौकरी करके पैसा कमाता है, you earn profit if you do job, if you earn rental income, that is a good thing. But if you sell your assets, आप घर के बर्तन बेच के पैसा कमा के लाते हैं, that is not a good thing. So revenue receipts represent increasing trend, which is a really good thing for India's fiscal consolidation. Second is capital receipts. Capital receipts जो हम सामान बेच के पैसा लाते हैं या उधार लेके पैसा आते हैं मार्केट से, so that is not a good thing. Now capital receipts are reducing, so that's again a good trend. So receipt sides, we see good trend both in revenue as well as capital account. Revenue receipts are increasing, capital receipts are decreasing. You should know just the trend. You don't have to memorize any of the figures in this one. Just look at the graph, have a screenshot, look at it before going to the prelims. So even if there is any factual question or any question conceptual or based on trends, you can easily do that. Now next is revenue expenditure. First is revenue expenditure, and next is effective capital expenditure. What is effective capital expenditure? We have a separate slide on that, but just look at revenue expenditure is increasing and capital expenditure is also increasing. This one is budgeted estimate, so we will not look at this one. Okay, so 10.5, 12.7, 15.0, effective capital expenditure is increasing in trend. Revenue expenditure is also increasing. Apart from that, again, you don't have to memorize any of the numbers that are given here. Just look at the graph, just look at the trend. That is more than enough. Now, increase in capital expenditure. This was a big news in this year's budget, and it has been big news from the past 2-3 budgets. UPSC has not asked a question. Even if they ask, 90% of the people are going to take right option in this one, because everyone knows that capital expenditure of this government has been increasing from past 3-4 years at exponential rate. For example, in financial year 18, it was around 2.75 lakh crore, and which has increased to 10 lakh crore in the financial year 24. And this year's budget, the budgeted estimates of capital expenditure is 11,11,111 crore. This is a special number announced by Ministry of Finance Minister of Government of India. So we have the capital expenditure which is increasing consistently every year. Even in the year of COVID-19, the capital expenditure increased. Even in the year of COVID-19, we saw that capital expenditure increased. So it is increasing consistently every year, and the growth rate this year was 11%. Last year it was 10 lakh crore. Last year the capital expenditure was 10 lakh crore. This year it's 11.11 lakh crore. So we see that the capital expenditure has increased by 11% this year. Before that year it was 7.5 lakh crore. Before that it was 5.5 lakh crore. So from past 2-3 years it was increasing at 35-36% rate, and this year it increased by 11%. You don't have to know more than that. Again, the past year's data is not very important, just the trend is important, and this year's figure is important, 11,11,111 crore. This is an important figure, and the growth rate in capital expenditure this year is 11.11%. Last year it was 10 lakh crore. This year it is 11.11 lakh crore. Now there are certain deficits on which UPSC has asked questions in the previous year, and you should know the conceptual difference between these deficits and what are the trends of these deficits. So in this slide we are going to look at what are the conceptual difference between different deficits. First is fiscal deficit. Now fiscal deficit is basically borrowings. गवर्नमेंट ऑफ इंडिया की जितनी बोरोविंग्स होती है उसी को हम फिस्कल डेफिसिट कहते हैं. जो भी उधार गवर्नमेंट ऑफ इंडिया ने लिया है लोगों से, दैट इज फिस्कल डेफिसिट. तो फिस्कल डेफिसिट इज बोरोविंग्स. नाउ व्हाट डज बोरोविंग मींस? दैट देयर आर टोटल एक्सपेंडिचर ऑफ द गवर्नमेंट ऑफ इंडिया माइनस टोटल earnings. Earnings will include all the revenue receipts and non-debt creating capital receipts. For example, disinvestment. For example, recovery of loan, which are part of non-debt creating capital receipts. So government of India has budgeted a certain expenditure. Okay, this year this much amount we want to spend. This is the total amount that we want to spend. But looking at the revenue and also non-debt creating capital receipts, we see okay, this is the amount that we are getting by different sources, by taxes, by interest, or by receipts of the loan that we had already given, or by disinvestment. This is the total amount that we get. So finally the government of India recognizes, identifies, okay, this is the amount that we have to borrow from the market to ensure that we can finance the budget, finance the expenditure that we had planned. So fiscal deficit is total expenditure minus total earnings. Earnings will include revenue as well as non-debt creating capital receipts. We saw in the capital receipts there were two types of capital receipts, debt creating and non-debt creating. Debt creating is fiscal deficit. Non-debt creating part becomes part of total earnings of the. Now deficit is financed by the borrowings. Whatever the fiscal deficit exists, deficit is कमी, चीज की कमी हो गई. So how does the government of India fulfills that deficit, finance that deficit? That is financed by the borrowings. Government of India borrows that money to fulfill the deficit, to finance the deficit. And this is the only deficit tracked by the government of India since 2018. Before 2018, revenue deficit was also tracked and targeted by the government of India. But after 2018, government of India said that revenue deficit does not represent true picture of the fiscal policy of the government of India or even fiscal consolidation. What is more important is fiscal deficit. जो fiscal deficit है इसको track किया और इसी को target करने की government of India बात करती है since 2018. Next is revenue deficit. अब revenue deficit क्या होता है? हमने देखा दो तरह की receipts थी, revenue receipts and we saw that there are two types of receipts. One is revenue receipts and the other is capital receipts. In expenditure also we saw there are two types of expenditure. One is revenue expenditure, other is capital expenditure. Now revenue deficit compares revenue receipts versus revenue expenditure. If the revenue expenditure is more than revenue receipts, then that shows that there is revenue deficit in the government of India. Now iski importance kya hai? What is the importance of revenue deficit? Why even the government of India calculates revenue deficit? Isko calculate karne ki zarurat kya pad gayi? Now we know that revenue receipt is a good thing. Capital receipt is not so good thing. Revenue receipts is a good thing because that is recurring in nature, that does not affect assets and liabilities of the government of India. So that is something that the government of India can earn year after year without affecting ownership of its own assets. So revenue receipts is a good thing. So how much, whatever expenditure that the government of India does, the more it can do from the revenue receipts, the better it is. Now in expenditure also there are two types of expenditure. One is revenue expenditure, other is capital expenditure. In expenditure we have seen that capital expenditure are the one which create assets, and the benefits of capital expenditure the government of India will continue to reap every year. So that is why the capital expenditure are a good thing. So what the government of India or any government tries to do, that revenue expenditure which will not give returns for years to come, those should be financed by revenue receipts only. हमारी इनकम से ही हमारा खर्चा चलना चाहिए. जो भी रेवेन्यू एक्सपेंडिचर क्या हो गया, खाने के अंदर खर्चा कर रहे हैं, कपड़े लेके आ गए या फिर घूमने फिरने के अंदर पैसा खर्च कर दिया, नाउ इफ आई एम अर्निंग 100 रुपीज, मेरी सैलरी 100 रुपए है और मैं घूमने के अंदर मूवीज, वॉचिंग मूवीज, प्लेइंग स्पोर्ट्स और having dinner outside, going to the pubs and everything, and I spend 110 rupees. I am spending more than I earn on something which will not create any return for me in the future. That is not a good thing. So that shows that there is revenue deficit in the government of India. So this is the meaning of revenue deficit. This is the simple equation that you should know. Fiscal deficit is total expenditure minus total earnings. Earnings will include non-debt creating capital. Also, revenue deficit is the one where revenue expenditure is more than revenue receipts. Now, it shows that non-productive expenses, for example, revenue expenses are non-productive expenses. Non-productive expenses are financed by non-recurring income. Revenue receipts are not enough to finance the revenue expenditure. So, what we do? We have capital receipts to finance revenue expenditure. If you could not understand this particular statement, not a problem. This definition is more than enough for you to solve any question in prelims, any conceptual question in prelims on revenue deficit. Next is primary deficit. Now, what happened is that even in the fiscal deficit, the does not represent true picture. Does not represent how much is the actual deficit that the government of India is facing because of this year's expenditure. So what government of India did is they calculated primary deficit. Primary deficit is कि fiscal deficit क्या है? Total borrowings. हमने इतना उधार लिया है. Then there is interest payment. उस उधार में से भी हम कुछ पैसा से interest पे कर रहे हैं. So for example, government of India has taken a loan of 100 rupees. 100 रुपए का उधार मार्केट से लिया है. And government of India is paying 80 rupees at interest. 80 रुपए तो इंटरेस्ट देने में ही चले गए. Now what the government of India has left is 20 rupees. So 20 rupees is primary deficit. 20 rupees is primary deficit. Government of India took borrowings of 100 rupees from the market, and out of those 100 rupees, government of India has already paid 80 rupees in interest payment only. 80 रुपए तो सिर्फ पहले का उधार था, उसका इंटरेस्ट देने में ही चले गए. जो 20 रुपए बचे वो प्राइमरी डेफिसिट है. This amount, this 20 rupees will be used productively by the government of India for services, providing social services or creating infrastructure in the country. So this amount, the primary deficit represents, okay, this is the amount that the government of India actually required to do the work of wealth redistribution or for the welfare of the people. So primary deficit represents the true amount that the government of India requires for its welfare activities or for its infrastructure development, for development activities. The primary deficit represents the true amount. Rest of the fiscal deficit, that is 80 rupees, was used in interest payment only. There is one more concept, which is primary surplus. Primary surplus is simply when interest payment is more than fiscal deficit. If the government of India has interest payment of 80 rupees और fiscal deficit सिर्फ 70 rupees ही है, what does it mean? That the government of India ने अपनी इनकम में से 10 रुपए का इंटरेस्ट पेमेंट तो कर दिया, बाकी 70 रुपए के इंटरेस्ट पेमेंट के लिए उन्होंने बाहर से लोन लिया. That represents primary surplus. So primary deficit and primary surplus. Primary deficit, अगर आपको ये सब बातें नहीं भी समझ में आई, आप सिर्फ इसका रट्टा मार लीजिए कि प्राइमरी डेफिसिट की इक्वेशन क्या है. प्राइमरी डेफिसिट इज फिस्कल डेफिसिट माइनस इंटरेस्ट पेमेंट, एंड व्हेन इंटरेस्ट पेमेंट इज मोर देन फिस्कल डेफिसिट, that is primary surplus. That is more than enough to solve any question in UPSC Prelims, any conceptual question in UPSC Prelims on deficit. Now, three deficit that we have done: fiscal deficit, total borrowings; revenue deficit, revenue expenditure minus revenue receipts; third is primary deficit, fiscal deficits minus interest payment; fourth one is effective revenue deficit. Effective revenue deficit, इसको कैलकुलेट करने की जरूरत इसलिए पड़ी थी कि गवर्नमेंट जो भी रेवेन्यू एक्सपेंडिचर करती है, एवरी रेवेन्यू एक्सपेंडिचर इज नॉट नॉन प्रोडक्टिव इन नेचर. फॉर एग्जांपल, गवर्नमेंट हैज गिवन certain grants to the states for capital creation purposes. For example, government of India has given 100 crore rupees to the government of Maharashtra to build tracks for the bullet train. Now, building tracks for the bullet train is a capital expenditure, that is creating assets for the economy, for the government of India. But for the government of India, the grants that they have given to the Maharashtra government, that will never come back, because that is part of grant. Grant means that it is one-sided payment. Grant is a one-sided payment, that is not going to come back. It is not a loan, it is a grant. So when government of India gives grants to the states for the purpose of creation of assets, for the purpose of creating capital assets, that still becomes part of revenue expenditure of the government of India. That still becomes part of revenue expenditure, because government of India is not going to receive that. But is that a bad thing? That is not a bad thing. That is resulting in creation of assets, and which will continue to have returns in future also. So all the revenue expenditure are not non-productive in nature. For example, government of India gives grants in aid to states, that is a very productive expenditure, but that increases revenue deficit. Revenue deficit increase हो जाता है क्योंकि revenue expenditure increase होता है. As a result, revenue deficit also increases. Now, what the government of India did is they started calculating effective revenue deficit. Effective revenue deficit is revenue deficit minus grants to states for capital creation. That out of all the revenue deficit there is, how much is the amount which is only for the purpose that we have given grants to the states for the creation of, for capital creation. We remove that and we get the effective revenue deficit. So these are the four deficit that you should know about. First is fiscal deficit, total borrowings of the government. Second is revenue deficit, revenue expenditure minus revenue receipts. Third is primary deficit, that is fiscal deficit minus interest payment. And fourth is effective revenue deficit, that is revenue deficit minus grants given to states for the purpose of creation of capital. So these are the four deficits that you should know. Primary deficit के साथ में you should know what is primary surplus. And on this term deficit financing, UPSC has asked a question, so I have written it down. Deficit financing is basically when government revenue is not enough to meet all the expenses. So whenever there is fiscal deficit, that deficit is financed by borrowings. उस deficit को finance करना पड़ेगा कहीं ना कहीं से, तो वो borrowings के through finance होता है. तो वही deficit financing का meaning है. और UPSC ने इसके ऊपर question पूछ लिया था कि which of the following statement reflects the meaning of deficit financing, और 4 statement उसके नीचे दे दिए थे. So this is how UPSC asks question. अगर UPSC asks question on any of these deficit, this slide and the next slide will be more than enough to solve that particular question in UPSC Prelims. Now looking at the fiscal deficit, the fiscal deficits in 2021, that was the year of COVID-19, was 9.2%. Before that it was very low, about 4.5%, but it increased to 9.2% in 2021, and after that it has been reducing consistently. This year also the fiscal deficit in interim budget is 5.1%. It was 5.9% last year, and in the revised estimates it was reduced from 5.9% to 5.8%. And this year also 24-25, the interim budget sets the target of 5.1% fiscal deficit, which shows that the government of India is on right track for fiscal consolidation. And one more thing is that the next year's target is 4.5%. 4.5% is next year's target. 25-26, the next budget that will come in the next February, that will have it. The government of India has already set a target. Next year will try to get to 4.5%. Currently the 24-25 financial year 25, the target is 5.1%. The budgeted estimates is 5.1%. Revenue deficit has also gone down from 2.8% to 2%. So every deficit, all the four deficits are showing a declining trend. Talk about fiscal deficit, revenue deficit, effective revenue deficit, or primary deficits. All the four deficits are showing a declining trend from 2021. In 2021, all the deficits increased. After that, they started declining. So these are certain other graphs which are given in the budget at a glance budget document. First is we will look at the unemployment rate. Unemployment rate is which have been reducing. This is the data of periodic labor force survey. What is unemployment rate? We have talked about in yesterday's class. What exactly is the unemployment rate? What is the equation of unemployment rate? So UPSC, if UPSC asks a conceptual question around unemployment rate, go to previous class, and we have that in our previous class. So this is the unemployment rate which have been reducing consistently. And apart from that, the gross NPAs, this graph also we saw in yesterday's class, that gross NPAs are reducing since financial year 18. Financial year 18, the gross NPAs increased to 11.2%, and they have been reducing from 11.2% to 0.2% in September 2023. So gross NPAs are decreasing. What is gross NPA? What is the difference between gross NPA and net NPA? This is also, we have talked about it in our last class. So go and watch the last class to have conceptual understanding about the difference between gross NPA, net NPA, about the unemployment rate, labor force participation rate, worker population ratio. So these are the certain important terms around which UPSC can frame a question. Next is rising volume of digital transaction. Digital transaction की total volume जो है वो continuously बढ़ रही है. The only graph that does not show any trend is current account deficit. The current account deficit does not show any trend. It reduces or increases every year. So even if there is a statement current account deficit is increasing consistently or decreasing consistently from past this many years, all those statements are going to be wrong, because current account deficit does not have any trend. It is zigzag in nature. Now this is the data about India and world GDP in terms of dollars. Now if UPSC gives a statement that India is growing faster than the world GDP in terms of dollar from past 5 years, most of the candidates will tick that statement correct, because they have not seen this graph. Because people will think, okay, India की growth rate तो बहुत अच्छी है, world की growth rate तो इतनी अच्छी नहीं है. But this is in terms of dollars. When we look at India and world GDP in terms of dollar, the growth rate of India and world GDP has been going up and down every other year. Now, financial year 21, in the year of COVID-19, India's growth rate was lower than world growth. After that, India's growth rate is higher than world growth rate, and it is expected to be higher than world growth rate. But even before that, in financial year 19, that is 2018-19, India's growth rate was lower than world growth rate. Before that also, in financial year 14, India's growth rate was lower than world growth rate. So it does not reflect any consistent trend. After financial year 21, financial year 22, 23, 24, the India's growth rate is higher than world growth rate. Only in the past 3 financial years that India's growth rate has been higher than the world growth rate. Apart from that, it has been up and down every other year. So if there is a statement about 5 years or 10 years, that statement is going to be wrong statement. And again, make sure this is in terms of dollar, it is not in terms of rupees. Next is certain focus areas which are given in this document. First is Garib Kalyan, Desh Ka Kalyan. In this, the data is not very important. What is important is this data can be important from the purpose of mains preparation. For UP prelims, this data is not very important. PBT has saved 2.7 lakh crore, the finance minister said in her speech. The direct benefit transfer has saved 2.7 lakh crore of the government of India. 24 crore people moved out of multidimensional poverty. Now, what is important in this graph is multidimensional poverty is reducing consistently, and it is around 11.3%. And other thing is that the government of India has talked about multidimensional poverty in their budget after many years. From past 4-5 years or more than that, the government of India was not talking about multidimensional poverty. So this year they have talked about multidimensional poverty. So you should know certain things about it. First of all is who prepares the multidimensional poverty index. There is Oxford Poverty and Human Development Initiative. So University of Oxford का initiative है Oxford Poverty and Human Development Initiative. अदर इज यूएनडीपी. तो यूएनडीपी और ओपीएचआई ये दोनों मिलके मल्टी डायमेंशनल पॉवर्टी इंडेक्स को रिलीज करते हैं. इसके अंदर 3 डायमेंशंस है. फर्स्ट इज हेल्थ, सेकंड इज एजुकेशन, थर्ड इज लिविंग स्टैंडर्ड. हेल्थ, एजुकेशन एंड लिविंग स्टैंडर्ड, इसके ऊपर क्वेश्चन बन सकता है. अभी कुछ दिन पहले सीएसआईआर के एएसओ का एग्जाम हुआ था. आईबीपीएस कंडक्ट्स दैट एग्जाम ऑफ सीएसआईआर एएसओ. In that exam, the question was asked on multidimensional poverty. Like there were given 4 options, and which of the following is not a dimension in the multidimensional poverty? और उसके अंदर 3 ऑप्शन थे, health, education and living standard. So UPSC can also ask similar question. So you should know there are 3 dimensions: health, education and living standard. In health, there are again 2 dimensions, 2 indicators: nutrition and child mortality. In education, there are 2 indicators: years of schooling and school attendance. And in living standard, there are 6 indicators: cooking fuel, improved sanitation, safe drinking water, electricity, flooring, asset ownership. Again, you don't have to memorize all the 10, but look at it at least 5-7 times before the prelims. So you should know what are the indicators. If the UPSC gives an option, you can recollect easily. Okay, this was there or this was not there. Again, one more important thing to know about this is that all the 3 dimensions, health, education and living standard, all the 3 dimensions have equal weightage. That is 1/3 weightage to health, 1/3 weightage to education and 1/3 weightage to living standard. And as a result, indicators also have similar. For example, in health, 1/6 is nutrition, 1/6 is child mortality. Education, 1/3 is divided by 1/2. Years of schooling is 1/6 and years of school attendance is 1/6. And these indicators will have lower weightage because 1/3 is divided into 6 stages. So this will have 1/18, 1/18, 1/18, 1/18, 1/18 and 1/18. So we have seen that multidimensional poverty index का trend क्या रहा है पिछले कई सालों से. We have seen इसको release कौन करता है, and we have also seen कि इसके अंदर dimensions क्या है और indicators क्या है. Dimensions का weightage 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 है. इंडिकेटर्स का वेटेज अगेन आप उसको जैसे 1/3 है तो डिवाइड बाय 2 कर लो, यहाँ पे भी डिवाइड बाय 2 कर लो और यहाँ पे भी डिवाइड बाय 6 कर लो. ऐसे करके इंडिकेटर्स का वेटेज भी आपको पता चल जाएगा. अगेन देयर इज वेरी लेस चांस कि यूपीएससी इसके ऊपर वेटेज के ऊपर क्वेश्चन पूछे, बट यू शुड नो. बट इंडिकेटर्स एंड डायमेंशंस के ऊपर क्वेश्चंस फ्रेम किया जा सकता है. इट इज एन इम्पॉर्टेंट इंडिकेटर इंडेक्स, सो यू शुड नो अबाउट इट. सो दीज आर द फ्यू थिंग्स जो कुछ रटने की भी होती है, क्योंकि 20% क्वेश्चन तो रटने वाले भी आते हैं ना, तो कुछ चीजें रटनी भी. उनमें से एक चीज ये थी. इसको आपको 5-7 बार देखोगे तो आपको समझ में. नाउ फार्मर्स के लिए बहुत सारी वेलफेयर स्कीम्स गवर्नमेंट ऑफ इंडिया लेके आई है. अगेन दिस डेटा इज फॉर द पर्पस ऑफ मेंस. आपके मेंस के अंदर ये काम का है, प्रीलिम्स के अंदर बहुत ज्यादा काम का नहीं है. प्रीलिम्स के अंदर क्या काम का है, ये ग्राफ. प्रोक्योरमेंट की बात करते हैं. द प्रोक्योरमेंट इज इंक्रीजिंग, but there is no consistent pattern कि consistently increase हो रहा है, consistently decrease हो रहा है, ऐसा कुछ है नहीं. We talk about rice, it reduced for 3 years, then it increased. We talk about wheat, it increased, it decreased, and it again this year is increased. So this year the rice and wheat both have increased, but compared to 2022 wheat has reduced. So what we look at is there is no consistent pattern, zigzag pattern प्रोक्योरमेंट के अंदर चल रहा है. अगेन मेक नोटिस दैट दिस इज अबाउट प्रोक्योरमेंट एंड नॉट प्रोडक्शन. कई लोग प्रोडक्शन भी इसको पढ़ सकते हैं. दिस इज प्रोक्योरमेंट ऑफ व्हीट एंड राइस बाय द गवर्नमेंट ऑफ इंडिया, जो एफसीआई प्रोक्योर करती है लोगों से. नेक्स्ट इज लखपति दीदी स्कीम. तो लखपति दीदी स्कीम वाज इन न्यूज इन दिस ईयर्स बजट because the finance minister announced that the total beneficiary of Lakpati Didi scheme have increased from 2 crore to 3 crore. Last year, the number of beneficiaries, the targeted beneficiaries of the Lakpati Didi scheme was 2 crore, which has increased, the government has increased to 3 crore women. Now, what is Lakpati Didi scheme? Lakpati Didi scheme is basically, its objective is to ensure that the women can become micro-entrepreneurs. It encourages women to become micro-entrepreneurs. So the objective, the target is to train 3 crore women in SHGs and enable them to earn 1 lakh rupees per annum. Now, Lakpati Didi scheme के अंदर क्या होता है? Self-help group are prepared, are formulated. So द गवर्नमेंट ऑफ इंडिया थ्रू BRLPS एंड अदर लाइवलीहुड प्रमोशन स्कीम्स, जीविका हो गया, राजीविका हो गया, इनके थ्रू व्हाट दे विल डू इज दे विल make SSGs of the women, self-help groups, and these self-help groups will be used to give various skills to the women, and the skills will include several skills like plumbing, LED bulb making, weaving, tailoring, ड्रोन ऑपरेशन एंड रिपेयर की भी स्किल्स women को दी जाएगी. तो बहुत सारी स्किल्स है जो गवर्नमेंट देगी इन women को, एंड द फाइनल ऑब्जेक्टिव इज टू इंश्योर कि these women become capable to earn 1 lakh rupees per annum. साल के 1 लाख रुपए कमा सके, एंड द पर्सन, इफ दैट पर्सन अर्न्स 1 lakh rupees per annum, she will be called Lakpati Didi. So that is the name of Lakpati scheme. It is initiated by DAY NRLM, नेशनल रूरल लाइवलीहुड मिशन का ये इनिशिएटिव है, और DAY NRLM इज अ स्कीम बाय मिनिस्ट्री ऑफ रूरल डेवलपमेंट. मिनिस्ट्री ऑफ रूरल डेवलपमेंट की स्कीम है DAY NRLM, और DAY NRLM ने लखपति दीदी को इनिशिएट किया है. SSGs को बहुत सारे ड्रोन्स भी इसके अंदर देने की बात हुई है. नाउ मूविंग फॉरवर्ड, नेक्स्ट इज टैक्स रिसीट्स. टैक्स रिसीट्स के अंदर क्या क्या चेंजेस हुए हैं इस बजट में. First of all, there are not many changes in tax receipts. There are two things that you should know. First is that there were certain tax benefits. What exactly were the tax benefits? You don't have to know about them, but there were certain tax benefits for startups, for investment made by sovereign wealth funds and pension funds और IFSC unit. इन सबके लिए कुछ टैक्स एग्जेम्पशंस थे, कुछ टैक्स बेनिफिट्स थे, and these benefits, these exemptions are continued for 1 more year till 31st March 2025. पहले इनकी जो expiry date थी, it was 31st March 2024. So this year's budget has extended the benefits, the tax benefits received by certain startups, IFSC units, or the sovereign wealth funds, pension funds. There were certain tax benefits given to them, जिनकी लिमिट थी, जिनकी डेडलाइन थी 31st March 2024. The deadline has been increased to 31st March 2025. So this is one news. Second is withdrawal of outstanding direct tax demand. So a lot of people had tax due, or direct tax due to the government of India. For example, someone earned some money in 2009, and that person had to pay tax of 5,000 rupees to the government of India. That amount was due from a long time. So similarly, government of India has said that up to 25,000 pertaining to financial year 10. तो फाइनेंशियल ईयर 2010 से पहले का अगर किसी का टैक्स ड्यू है, टैक्स इज ड्यू मोर देन 25,000, डायरेक्ट टैक्स की बात कर रहे हैं, इनकम टैक्स, कॉर्पोरेट टैक्स, ये सब होता है जो. तो डायरेक्ट टैक्स के अंदर क्या क्या आता है, इनकम टैक्स, कॉर्पोरेट टैक्स आता है. अगर वो 25,000 से ज्यादा है और 2010 से पहले का कोई टैक्स ड्यू है, देन गवर्नमेंट ऑफ इंडिया ने जो है वो उसको माफ कर दी. सिमिलरली फाइनेंशियल ईयर 11 से 15, 2010 के बाद से लेके 2015 तक अगर कोई अमाउंट है जो 10,000 रुपए तक का ड्यू है, देन द गवर्नमेंट ऑफ इंडिया इज withdrawn the demand for that outstanding amount, and as a result, the finance minister in her speech has claimed that 1 crore people will benefit from this, that the government of India had demand due from at least 1 crore people in this category, that is before financial year 10 up to 25,000 rupees, financial year 11 to 15 up to 10,000 rupees. इससे ज़्यादा आपको जानने की ज़रूरत नहीं है. नेक्स्ट इज जो टैक्स रेट्स हैं, टैक्स स्लैब्स हैं, वो सेम रखे गए हैं. जो टैक्स स्लैब्स थे पहले वो भी अभी भी एग्जिस्ट करते हैं. इनकम टैक्स स्लैब्स हो गया, कॉर्पोरेट टैक्स हो गया, एवरीथिंग कंटिन्यूज एज इट वाज बिफोर. फॉर एग्जांपल कॉर्पोरेट टैक्स रेट जो है वो 22% है, तो दैट विल कंटिन्यू. और कुछ डोमेस्टिक कंपनी, कुछ मैन्युफैक्चरिंग कंपनीज होती है जिनके लिए 15% होता है. देयर इज सर्टेन क्राइटेरिया कि इस डेट से इस डेट तक अगर कोई मैन्युफैक्चरिंग कंपनी बनी है तो उसके लिए 15% है, तो दैट इज ऑल्सो गोइंग टू कंटिन्यू. एंड द टैक्स स्लैब, जो नया टैक्स स्लैब है 3 to 6 lakh, 6 to 9 lakh, 9 to 12 lakh, that tax slab will also continue. In last class we talk about tax slabs कि exactly tax slabs क्या हैं. That will continue. एंड अप टू 7 लाख रुपीज अगर आपकी इनकम है तो आपको टैक्स रिबेट मिल जाता है, और जब रिबेट मिलता है तो आपको टैक्स जो आपने पे किया है वो वापस मिल जाता है. दिस इज ऑल्सो वी टॉक्ड अबाउट इट इन आवर लास्ट क्लास. So moving forward, other major initiatives in this budget. Now these are the important initiatives that you should know about in this budget. First is interest free 50-year capex loan. Capex is capital expenditure. तो कैपिटल एक्सपेंडिचर के लिए गवर्नमेंट ऑफ इंडिया स्टेट्स को लोन देती है, लोन दे रही है, इसका मतलब वो वापस उसे रिकवर करेगी। तो गवर्नमेंट ऑफ इंडिया के भी कैपिटल एक्सपेंडिचर का ये पार्ट बनता है, एंड द पर्पज इज फॉर कैपिटल क्रिएशन, एसेट क्रिएशन का पर्पज है। तो गवर्नमेंट ऑफ इंडिया इंटरेस्ट फ्री 50 साल का लोन देती है स्टेट्स को। लास्ट ईयर द गवर्नमेंट ऑफ इंडिया एडवांस्ड अराउंड 1.1 लाख करोड़, उससे पहले गवर्नमेंट ऑफ इंडिया अराउंड एडवांस्ड 1 लाख करोड़। दिस ईयर द अमाउंट हैज बीन इंक्रीज्ड टू 1.3 lakh crore. 1.3 lakh crore is the amount that the government of India is going to give to different states at without any interest for 50 years of period for the purpose of capital creation. capex के ये लोन है। Next is 300 units free electricity to 1 crore household through solar rooftop solarization. तो rooftop solarization के through at least 1 crore households will benefit and they will be able to have 300 units of free electricity every month. हर महीने 300 units की free electricity उनको मिल सकता है, and this household will benefit rupees 15,000 to 18,000 rupees annually. के लिए भी गवर्नमेंट ऑफ इंडिया ने जो है बजट है रूफटॉप सोलर पावर प्रोग्राम, एक रूफटॉप सोलर पावर प्रोग्राम गवर्नमेंट ऑफ इंडिया चलाती है, उसका बजट 2000 करोड़ से बढ़ा के 4,500 करोड़ कर दिया है। दिस डेटा अगेन इज नॉट इम्पोर्टेंट। 15,000 to 18,000 annually, this is important, UPSC can frame a question around it। 15,000 to 18,000 monthly भी किया जा सकता है। So there are certain factual thing also that you should know. First is 300 units, second is 1 crore household, third is 15,000 to 18,000 monthly annually. So this is the these are the things that these are the important initiatives in this particular budget. And one last is 1 lakh crore corpus for R&D's sunrise sector. The finance minister has announced that 1 lakh crore rupees corpus will be created for research and development expenditure various sunrise sectors. Sunrise sectors क्या होते हैं? Up and coming sectors which have huge potential for growth in future. For example, ये ड्रोन्स की इंडस्ट्री हो गई, आर्टिफिशियल इंटेलिजेंस हो गया। तो दीज आर दी सनराइज सेक्टर जिनका फ्यूचर के अंदर बहुत हाई ग्रोथ रेट एक्सपेक्टेड है। जो भी टेक्नोलॉजी से रिलेटेड है ज्यादातर वही सेक्टर सनराइज सेक्टर्स हैं। तो सनराइज सेक्टर्स के लिए रिसर्च एंड डेवलपमेंट के लिए 1 लाख करोड़ रुपए का कॉर्पोरेट सेट किया जाएगा। इसके बारे में ज्यादा डिटेल फाइनेंस मिनिस्टर ने अपनी स्पीच के अंदर नहीं दी थी। सो दिस इज मोर देन इनफ फॉर यू टू नो। Next is railways. Railways के अंदर the outlays was increased by 5.8%. Figure is not important. What you should know is कि outlay increase कर दिया है. Other is 40,000 coaches to Vande will be revamped to Vande Bharat standard. 40,000 coaches will be revamped to Vande Bharat standards. और 3 रेलवे कॉरिडोर नए अनाउंस किए हैं। फर्स्ट है एनर्जी मिनरल एंड सीमेंट कॉरिडोर, सेकंड है पोर्ट कनेक्टिविटी कॉरिडोर, एंड थर्ड है हाई ट्रैफिक डेंसिटी कॉरिडोर। So there is energy, mineral and cement corridor, port connectivity corridor, high traffic density corridor. Again prelims के perspective से बहुत ज़्यादा important नहीं है, but in rare chance UPSC might ask, तो बहुत ज़्यादा रटने का इस ईयर के बजट के अंदर है नहीं। So what you need to do is just have a look at it for 3-4 times before the prelims. Even if there is a question, you will be easily able to eliminate wrong options. Next is Asha and Anganwadi staff will get the health cover in the Ayushman Bharat, Pradhan Mantri Jan Arogya Yojana. Ayushman Bharat Pradhan Mantri Jan Arogya Yojana, the Asha and Anganwadi workers have become the beneficiary. प्रधान मंत्री जन आरोग्य योजना जो है वो 5 लाख रुपए का हेल्थ इंश्योरेंस देती है फॉर सेकेंडरी एंड टर्शियरी केयर। फॉर सेकेंडरी एंड टर्शियरी केयर के लिए 5 लाख रुपए का हेल्थ इंश्योरेंस। उसके अंदर आशा एंड आंगनवाड़ी वर्कर्स हैव बिकम नाउ एलिजिबल एज बेनिफिशियरीज। बेनिफिशियरीज जो प्रधानमंत्री जन आरोग्य योजना के हैं, दे आर आइडेंटिफाइड बाय SECC डेटा, सोशियो इकोनॉमिक कास्ट सेंसस का डेटा है 2011 का। बेस्ड ऑन दैट the beneficiaries are identified for Pradhan Mantri Jan Arogya Yojana, and more than 10 crore families are eligible. About 55 crore people are eligible for Pradhan Mantri Jan Arogya Yojana. इसमें गवर्नमेंट के अपने क्राइटेरियाज है कि इतनी इनकम होनी चाहिए, इस पर्टिकुलर ऑक्यूपेशंस के, जैसे मैनुअल स्कैवेंजर्स और बहुत सारे ऑक्यूपेशंस हैं, बहुत लंबी लिस्ट है उसकी। तो ये सारे ऑक्यूपेशंस के लोग आर एलिजिबल फॉर प्रधानमंत्री जन आरोग्य योजना, आयुष्मान भारत प्रोग्राम, and now they have added ASHA workers and Anganwadi workers as also beneficiaries of this particular program. Next is UWIN platform launch किया गया है। UWIN platform जो है, कोविड platform आपको याद होगा, कोविन के ऊपर we used to register and book schedules for our vaccines. Similarly, there is a UWIN platform. UWIN platform का purpose है that COVID was for only COVID-19 vaccine, but UWIN platform, the purpose of UWIN platform is to ensure that the immunization का जो है डिजिटल डेटा एक क्रिएट हो जाए, एक डिजिटल प्लेटफॉर्म हो जिसके थ्रू इम्यूनाइजेशन ट्रैक भी किया जा सके और टारगेट भी किया जा सके। तो इसका वैक्सीनेशन और इम्यूनाइजेशन का इसका पूरा प्रोग्राम है। इनिशियली इट हैज बीन स्टार्टेड फॉर प्रेग्नेंट वुमेन एंड न्यूबॉर्न चाइल्ड, इन्फेंट्स के लिए और प्रेग्नेंट वुमेन के लिए जो भी वैक्सीनेशंस है, तो pregnant women and newborn child can be registered on UWIN platform, and the platform will continue to give you updates about what is the next vaccine that you have to take, on which date that you have to take. There is a lot of misinformation in the people, so to reduce that misinformation and to streamline the whole immunization process from the before the birth of a child, the government has launched this UWIN platform. Will track delivery outcomes also, that what was the result of the delivery, was there any stillbirth or not, was there any death of an infant or not. So this will track delivery outcome also, and apart from that, information about routine immunization in area and book appointments. You can book appointments about the immunization, and if there are any routine immunization in your area, then that also you will get the information on this platform, similar to कोविन। कोविन के अंदर भी हम लोग हॉस्पिटल की लिस्ट देख लेते थे और उसके अंदर कितने बजे का स्लॉट, कौन सा अपॉइंटमेंट बुक करना है, वो सब हम कर लेते थे। तो सिमिलरली यूविन प्लेटफॉर्म है फॉर इम्यूनाइजेशन ऑफ न्यूबॉर्न चाइल्ड एंड प्रेग्नेंट वुमेन, और इसको धीरे धीरे एक्सपेंड करके हर तरह की वैक्सीन इसके अंदर लाई जाएगी। नेक्स्ट डेटा इज अबाउट द हाउसिंग। हाउसिंग के अंदर देयर इज इंक्रीज इन प्रधानमंत्री आवास योजना ग्रामीण के अंदर is close to achieving the target of 3 crore. पहले टारगेट था कि 3 करोड़ हाउसेस विल बी बिल्ड अंदर प्रधानमंत्री आवास योजना ग्रामीण, जो रूरल, ग्रामीण मींस रूरल। तो इन प्रधानमंत्री आवास योजना ग्रामीण there was the target to build 3 crore houses. Now the government of India has added that in next 5 years we will build 2 crore more houses in Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana Gramin. And apart from that, the government of India has also promised to launch a new scheme for middle class in the urban areas. Urban areas के अंदर भी ऐसा ही middle class के लिए affordable housing की schemes government of India लेके आएगी. There is increase in Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana allocation also. So this is about the budget that I had prepared this slides. Apart from that, there are other things also that you should know about the budget. Now, whenever the budget comes, what you have to do, whenever the budget comes, what you have to do, never depend on any class. किसी भी क्लास के ऊपर आपको डिपेंड नहीं होना है, किसी भी टीचर्स के ऊपर, किसी भी इंस्टीट्यूट के ऊपर आपको डिपेंड नहीं होना है. What you have to do is go to this site indiabudget.gov.in. indiabudget.gov.in पे जाइए. इस पे सारे बजट और सारे इकोनॉमिक सर्वे अवेलेबल है. फॉर एग्जांपल, पिछले ईयर्स के बजट और इकोनॉमिक सर्वे भी आर अवेलेबल ऑन दिस वेबसाइट. और इस साल के जितने भी बजट से रिलेटेड डॉक्यूमेंट्स है, एवरी डॉक्यूमेंट इज हियर. So 2 documents that you have to check, or you always have to check whenever the budget comes. और आप यहाँ पे आके ओरिजिनल डॉक्यूमेंट देखिए, क्योंकि क्लास के अंदर एक टीचर का बायस होता है. Whatever teacher thinks is important, teacher will put there. Apart from that, there can be anything which is important that the teacher has missed. So always have the control over your own preparation. तो अपनी प्रिपरेशन के ऊपर हमेशा कंट्रोल बना के रखिए. तो इसके अंदर बजट हाईलाइट्स करके एक डॉक्यूमेंट आता है. तो दिस इज द बजट हाईलाइट, जिसके अंदर बहुत ही सुंदर तरीके से ग्राफ्स में और डायग्राम्स के अंदर दे रखा होता है कि इस साल का बजट क्या है. दिस इज द ग्राफ दैट वी सॉ इन द क्लास. गरीब कल्याण अन्न योजना ये हमने देखी थी. गरीब कल्याण, देश का कल्याण, मल्टी डायमेंशनल पॉवर्टी का रिडक्शन हुआ. दिस इज ऑल्सो व्हाट वी सॉ इन द क्लास. सो फीमेल लेबर फोर्स पार्टिसिपेशन रेट. So every important thing about the budget. So these are also the graphs that we saw. These are the graphs. कैपिटल एक्सपेंडिचर के अंदर इंक्रीज हुआ है, एफडीआई के अंदर इंक्रीज हुआ है, a lot of things. Everything cannot be taught in the class. So budget highlights जो होती है, you should always check out the original document by Government of India. These are the graphs also which we saw in the class. Similarly, एक और डॉक्यूमेंट होता है बजट एट ए ग्लांस. तो बजट एट ए ग्लांस जो है, दिस इज अ वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट डॉक्यूमेंट, क्योंकि इसके अंदर पूरे बजट के रिलेटेड जितनी भी हमने चीजें कंसेप्चुअल चीजें पढ़ी थी वो सारी इसके अंदर है. नाउ व्हाट योर अगेन अप्रोच इज गोइंग टू बी when you look at the budget at a glance. We will look at budget at a glance in this class only, and you see how I approach this document. Our purpose is not to memorize or ratify any of the data, any of the figure that is given here. Our purpose is to ensure that we understand what the government is trying to tell us. Government budget से लोगों को कुछ inform करती है कि अच्छा ऐसा ऐसा खर्चा हुआ है, ऐसे ऐसे हमारी कमाई हुई है. These are the expenditure, these are the receipts that we have. Now we should be able to understand, as a citizen and as a UPSC aspirant, we should be able to understand what the government is trying to tell us, and for that we have to have conceptual clarity about different terms that are given in this particular document. So we know what is revenue receipts. इसके अंदर हमने देखा था कि टैक्स रेवेन्यू होता है, नॉन टैक्स होता है. कैपिटल रिसीट्स के अंदर भी वी टॉक्ड अबाउट कि अच्छा रिकवरी ऑफ लोन जो होता है वो कैपिटल रिसीट्स का पार्ट होता है. अदर रिसीट्स हो गया, बोरोविंग्स एंड अदर लाइबिलिटीज हो गया. तो टोटल रिसीट्स हो गया. एक्सपेंडिचर भी है, एक्सपेंडिचर के अंदर भी रेवेन्यू अकाउंट है. रेवेन्यू के अंदर वी हैव सीन कि इंटरेस्ट पेमेंट इज पार्ट ऑफ रेवेन्यू अकाउंट. वी हैव सीन दैट ग्रांट्स इन एड इज आल्सो पार्ट ऑफ रेवेन्यू अकाउंट. सिमिलरली कैपिटल एक्सपेंडिचर भी होता है. नाउ देयर इज अ न्यू टर्म हियर, इफेक्टिव कैपिटल एक्सपेंडिचर. अब ये इफेक्टिव कैपिटल एक्सपेंडिचर क्या होता है? सो व्हेन यू लुक एट दिस डॉक्यूमेंट you just read the different terms. Okay, अच्छा हाँ, इसका मतलब मुझे समझ में आ रहा है. I can easily understand what the government is trying to tell me. But you read the statement effective capital expenditure. अब ये effective capital expenditure क्या बला आ गई भाई? हमने तो कभी किसी क्लास के अंदर नहीं पढ़ा, किसी टीचर ने हमको पढ़ाया नहीं कि effective capital expenditure क्या होता है. और अगर UPSC ask a question upon effective capital expenditure and gives 4 statement, most of the aspirant are going to take wrong answer in this. क्यों? क्योंकि उन्होंने कभी ओरिजिनल डॉक्यूमेंट खोल के ही नहीं देखा. आप ओरिजिनल डॉक्यूमेंट खोल के देखिए, आपको रटना नहीं है, आपको इसके ऊपर कोई 8-10 घंटे नहीं लगाने, पर 1 घंटा 2 घंटा आप इसको खोल के देखिए. एंड व्हेन यू लुक एट इट, यू विल रियलाइज दैट देयर आर सर्टेन न्यू थिंग्स दैट यू डिड नॉट नोटिस और व्हिच वर नॉट कवर्ड इन एनी क्लास. इफेक्टिव रेवेन्यू डेफिसिट was not taught to me in any class that I took when I was a student, and I'm sure that is effective capital expenditure was not taught in any class. And I'm sure it is true for most of the aspirants. तो आप जब खोलोगे तो आपको पता चलेगा अच्छा इफेक्टिव कैपिटल एक्सपेंडिचर यहाँ पे लिख रखा है 12 + 13. 13 क्या है कि कैपिटल एक्सपेंडिचर. टोटल कैपिटल एक्सपेंडिचर हमें पता है. अच्छा कैपिटल एक्सपेंडिचर क्या होता है वो तो हमें पता है. एसेट क्रिएटिंग होता है या फिर किसी को लोन दे रहे हैं तो दैट इज कैपिटल एक्सपेंडिचर. और 12 पे क्या है? ग्रांट्स इन एड फॉर क्रिएशन ऑफ कैपिटल अकाउंट. नाउ हमें पता था इफेक्टिव रेवेन्यू डेफिसिट. इफेक्टिव रेवेन्यू डेफिसिट क्या था? रेवेन्यू डेफिसिट माइनस ग्रांट्स इन एड फॉर क्रिएशन ऑफ कैपिटल. ग्रांट्स इन एड फॉर क्रिएशन ऑफ कैपिटल, उसको हम माइनस कर देते थे रेवेन्यू डेफिसिट से, तो हमारे पास इफेक्टिव रेवेन्यू डेफिसिट आ जाता था. सिमिलरली कैपिटल एक्सपेंडिचर के अंदर हम अगर उन ग्रांट्स इन एड को ऐड कर दें, इफ वी ऐड 12 + 13, if we add the grants in aid to capital expenditure, we get effective capital expenditure. एक तो गवर्नमेंट अपनी तरफ से कैपिटल एक्सपेंडिचर कर रही है और वो स्टेट्स को पैसा दे रही है ग्रांट्स के रूप में, इन फॉर्म्स ऑफ ग्रांट्स that you create assets for this country. For example, हमने एग्जांपल लिया था गवर्नमेंट ऑफ इंडिया गिविंग grants to the government of Maharashtra for creation of for laying tracks for a bullet train. So that is what is grants in aid for capital creation. तो उससे कैपिटल तो क्रिएट हो रही है. तो इफेक्टिव कैपिटल एक्सपेंडिचर इज a capital expenditure by government of India and grants in aid to states for creation of assets. तो ऐसे ही आपको इन डॉक्यूमेंट्स को देखना है. आत्मनिर्भर बनिए, है ना, किसी भी टीचर पे डिपेंड मत रहिए. तो अगेन लुकिंग एट द इंपॉर्टेंट टर्म्स, इफेक्टिव रेवेन्यू डेफिसिट हमें पता है, फिस्कल डेफिसिट हमें पता है, प्राइमरी डेफिसिट. तो जो 4 डेफिसिट हमने देखे थे वो चारों के चारों यहाँ पे दे रखे हैं. इनके अंदर आप ट्रेंड्स भी देख लीजिए. अच्छा ये 3.9, 2.82 अच्छा रिड्यूस हो रहा है. के अंदर देखा 6.4, 5.8, 5.1 फिजिकल डेफिसिट जो है वो भी रिड्यूस हो रहा है, प्राइमरी डेफिसिट भी रिड्यूस हो रहा है, 1.5 आ गया है। इफेक्टिव रेवेन्यू डेफिसिट भी आप देखिए 2.8, 1.7, 1.8, 0.8, तो इफेक्टिव रेवेन्यू डेफिसिट भी रिड्यूस हो रहा है। तो आपने मेजर मेजर ट्रेंड देख लिया। आपको कोई भी डेटा, कोई भी फिगर इसके अंदर याद नहीं करना है, you just have to understand the concepts, you just have to understand the terms which are given in the budget. Now moving forward, this is about the different sources and receipts of the receipts and expenditure of the government of India. अलग अलग जगह का ये charts हमने देख लिए थे वैसे। This is about fiscal deficit, revenue deficit, effective revenue deficit, primary deficit, को भी हमने देख लिया था। Now debts, इसके ऊपर आगे एक और चार्ट दे रखा है, सो उस चार्ट के अंदर हम ज्यादा अच्छे से समझ पाएंगे कि क्या क्या चीजें डेट्स की है। So this is the graph of deficit trends. तो आप इसका स्क्रीनशॉट ले लीजिए कि डेफिसिट ट्रेंड्स कैसे हैं, आप इसका स्क्रीनशॉट ले लीजिए एंड यू सी कि अच्छा पहले ये रिड्यूसिंग था, then for 2 years it increased and after that it again started reducing and it is true for all the 4 deficits. ये चारों डेफिसिट्स का सिमिलर ट्रेंड है कि 2014 से लेके 2018-19 तक रिड्यूस हुआ, उसके बाद में 2 साल बढ़ा and after that it has been reducing consistently. After financial year 21 these all the 4 deficits have been reducing consistently. अगर अगेन आपको डेटा नहीं याद करना है, आपको सिर्फ ग्राफ को 3-4 बार देखना है ताकि आपके दिमाग में ये छप जाए। आप इसको यूपीएससी के मेंस के आंसर राइटिंग के अंदर भी यूज कर सकते हैं। इफ देयर इज एनी क्वेश्चन ऑन फिस्कल कंसोलिडेशन और फिस्कल पॉलिसी ऑफ द गवर्नमेंट ऑफ इंडिया, so you can create this graph and give a broader framework, broader timeline. Now these are the sources of deficit financing. Deficit financing हमने क्या कहा था कि फिस्कल डेफिसिट है उसको गवर्नमेंट जो है अलग अलग तरीके से फाइनेंस करती है मार्केट से पैसा उधार लेके। तो डेफिसिट फाइनेंसिंग के ये जितने भी सोर्सेस है एवरीथिंग बिकम्स पार्ट ऑफ फिस्कल डेफिसिट ऑफ द गवर्नमेंट ऑफ इंडिया और टोटल बोरोविंग्स ऑफ द गवर्नमेंट ऑफ इंडिया। तो द बिगेस्ट वन इज मार्केट बोरोविंग्स। इसके अंदर क्या है, right hand side scale is for the market borrowings and the rest 3 are given on the left hand side. तो market borrowings का this year it is around 11 lakh करोड़। तो market borrowings जो है वो सबसे बड़ा सोर्स है टू फाइनेंस डेफिसिट ऑफ द गवर्नमेंट। तो गवर्नमेंट का जो डेफिसिट बजट होता है उसको फाइनेंस करने के लिए सबसे बड़ा है मार्केट बोरोविंग्स। मार्केट बोरोविंग्स के अंदर क्या है, गवर्नमेंट सिक्योरिटीज, यहाँ लिखा हुआ है, कुछ नया कहीं से कोई किताब विताब पढ़ने की जरूरत नहीं है, इसी को देखिए और इसी को देख के समझिए कि लार्जर ट्रेंड्स क्या है, लार्जर फिगर्स क्या है, इनका मतलब क्या है। तो इसके अंदर आप देखोगे मार्केट बोरोविंग सबसे ज्यादा है। अच्छा, मार्केट बोरोविंग्स का क्या मतलब है, गवर्नमेंट सिक्योरिटीज। गवर्नमेंट सिक्योरिटीज कौन सी होती है, जो लॉन्ग टर्म लोन्स होते हैं, बॉन्ड्स होते हैं ना। गवर्नमेंट बॉन्ड्स इशू करती है, गवर्नमेंट ऑफ इंडिया भी करती है, स्टेट गवर्नमेंट्स भी करती है। ये गवर्नमेंट ऑफ इंडिया का डेटा है, तो इसमें ऑब्वियसली गवर्नमेंट ऑफ इंडिया के ही बॉन्ड्स होंगे। तो गवर्नमेंट ऑफ इंडिया, तो बॉन्ड्स दैट गवर्नमेंट ऑफ इंडिया इज द लार्जेस्ट सोर्स ऑफ फाइनेंसिंग डेफिसिट बजट ऑफ द गवर्नमेंट ऑफ इंडिया। सेकंड नंबर पे कौन सा है, ब्लू कलर वाला। ब्लू कलर क्या है, सिक्योरिटीज अगेंस्ट स्मॉल सेविंग्स। अगेन मोस्ट ऑफ द एस्पिरेंट डू नॉट नो कि सिक्योरिटीज अगेंस्ट स्मॉल सेविंग्स का क्या मतलब होता है, और वो गवर्नमेंट ऑफ इंडिया के फिस्कल डेफिसिट का पार्ट है, ये तो किसी को भी नहीं पता था। तो सिक्योरिटीज अगेंस्ट स्मॉल सेविंग्स का क्या मतलब है, सिक्योरिटीज अगेंस्ट स्मॉल सेविंग्स क्या होती है कि गवर्नमेंट ऑफ इंडिया की काफी सारी सेविंग स्कीम्स होती है ना। फॉर एग्जांपल नेशनल स्मॉल सेविंग स्कीम हो गया, तो उसके अंदर बहुत सारी सेविंग स्कीम है, पेंशन फंड हो गया या फिर पोस्टल डिपॉजिट्स हो गया। तो ये सारे क्या हैं, पीपल लाइक अस, कॉमन पीपल, हम लोग एक बुढ़ापे के लिए या फिर कुछ सिक्योर सेविंग्स रखना चाहते हैं, तो पोस्टल के अंदर डिपॉजिट कर दिया, या फिर पेंशन फंड है, एक पेंशन फंड खरीद लिया। तो ये सारा पैसा जाता कहाँ है, ये सारा पैसा सरकार के पास ही तो जाता है, और सरकार, द गवर्नमेंट ऑफ इंडिया गिव्स अ फिक्स्ड इंटरेस्ट रेट ऑन दैट पर्टिकुलर सेविंग। तो उस सेविंग के ऊपर, जैसे पेंशन फंड हो गया या फिर पोस्टल डिपॉजिट हो गया, तो पोस्टल डिपॉजिट सेविंग, स्मॉल सेविंग स्कीम हो गया, तो उसके अंदर हमने पैसा लगा दिया और गवर्नमेंट ऑफ इंडिया सेज आई विल गिव यू 5% और 6% इंटरेस्ट रेट एवरी ईयर। नाउ तो गवर्नमेंट ऑफ इंडिया अपने जेब से तो वो इंटरेस्ट नहीं देगी, तो गवर्नमेंट ऑफ इंडिया यूटिलाइज दैट मनी टू फाइनेंस इट्स फिस्कल डेफिसिट। तो गवर्नमेंट ऑफ इंडिया का जो फिस्कल डेफिसिट होता है वो उसको उस पैसे को यूज करके अपने जैसे इस बार कैपिटल एक्सपेंडिचर बहुत बढ़ा दिया है, तो रोड्स बना रहे हैं, कैनाल्स बना रहे हैं, इलेक्ट्रिसिटी लाइंस बना रहे हैं, तो वो इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर डेवलप करने के लिए उस पैसे को यूज कर लिया। एंड व्हेन देयर इज इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर इन द कंट्री, तो गवर्नमेंट का टैक्स रेवेन्यू बढ़ेगा, और टैक्स रेवेन्यू जैसे ही बढ़ेगा, गवर्नमेंट विल बी इजीली एबल टू पे ऑफ द पीपल द इंटरेस्ट ऑन द स्मॉल सेविंग स्कीम्स। So after market borrowing, second biggest source is securities against small savings. That is part of fiscal deficit of the government of India. पोस्टल डिपॉजिट हो गया, जो हम पोस्टल डिपॉजिट्स के अंदर फिक्स कि भाई फिक्स इंटरेस्ट रेट मिल जाएगा, या फिर पेंशन फंड्स हो गए, ये सब गवर्नमेंट के फिस्कल डेफिसिट का पार्ट है. तो अगर किसी ने ये ग्राफ नहीं देखा है तो मोस्ट प्रोबेबली दैट पर्सन वुड नॉट नो अबाउट इट. नेक्स्ट इज शॉर्ट टर्म बोरोविंग्स हो गया. शॉर्ट टर्म बोरोविंग्स क्या है? टी बिल्स हो गया, टी बिल्स, ट्रेजरी बिल्स, 30 डेज, 60 डेज, 90 डेज. तो ये जो होते हैं ये टी बिल्स होते हैं, ट्रेजरी बिल्स होते हैं. तो वो नेक्स्ट है. और उसके बाद में अदर बोरोविंग्स दैट द गवर्नमेंट ऑफ इंडिया हैज. नाउ दिस वाज अबाउट द एक्सपेंडिचर. नाउ वी हैव रिसीट्स. अगेन आप देखिए टैक्स रिसीट्स के अंदर सारे टैक्सेस की लिस्ट दे रखी है. आपको टैक्स की लिस्ट नहीं याद करनी है, आपको सिर्फ लॉजिक देखना. अच्छा, जितना भी टैक्स और ड्यूटीज है, सेस हो गया, कंपनसेशन, जीएसटी का कंपनसेशन, सेस हो गया, सब कुछ ग्रॉस टैक्स रेवेन्यू का पार्ट है ना. उसके बाद में वी आल्सो सी की नॉन टैक्स रेवेन्यू. अच्छा, कई लोगों को कंफ्यूजन होता है कि यार रेवेन्यू तो गवर्नमेंट की इनकम है और गवर्नमेंट की इनकम जो है वो टैक्स है, तो व्हाट इज नॉन टैक्स रेवेन्यू. अब नॉन टैक्स रेवेन्यू के अंदर क्या क्या आता है, तो आप उनको ये दिखा दीजिए कि इंटरेस्ट रिसीट्स, गवर्नमेंट ऑफ इंडिया हैज गिवन लोन टू समवन एंड रिसीव्स इंटरेस्ट अपॉन इट, दैट इज नॉन टैक्स रेवेन्यू. डिविडेंड्स एंड प्रॉफिट्स, that it gets from the public sector enterprises. External grants, if any other country has given grants to the government of India, for example, if World Bank gives grants to the government of India, or Japan gives grants to the India, now that grant become part of non-tax revenue of the government of India. That is not a capital receipts, क्योंकि government of India की assets and liabilities को affect नहीं करता है. That becomes part of non-tax revenue. So grants from other external grants that the government of India receives becomes part of non-tax revenue. Apart from that, there are other non-tax revenue, receipts of union territories. Union territories के भी कुछ receipts होते हैं, तो वो भी गवर्नमेंट ऑफ इंडिया के नॉन टैक्स रेवेन्यू का पार्ट होगा. अब यूपीएससी अगर स्टेटमेंट दे दे सीट्स ऑफ यूनियन टेरिटरीज, तो लोगों को लगेगा अरे यूनियन टेरिटरी तो अलग है, गवर्नमेंट ऑफ इंडिया अलग है, बट दैट इज पार्ट ऑफ नॉन टैक्स रेवेन्यू. तो सिमिलरली वी हैव कैपिटल रिसीट्स, जिसके अंदर हमने देखा था नॉन डेट और डेट क्रिएटिंग कैपिटल रिसीट्स होता है. ये ट्रेंड्स इन टैक्स रिसीट्स है. टैक्स रिसीट्स के अंदर ये कुछ ट्रेंड्स हैं. व्हाट यू हैव टू नो अबाउट इट इज कि इनडायरेक्ट टैक्स और डायरेक्ट टैक्स का शेयर देख लीजिए कि डायरेक्ट टैक्स इज 6.7%, इनडायरेक्ट टैक्स इज 4.9%. सो डायरेक्ट टैक्स जो है वो इनडायरेक्ट टैक्स से ज्यादा है. इनडायरेक्ट टैक्सेस के अंदर क्या आता है, ड्यूटीज था, या एक्साइज ड्यूटीज हो गया, या फिर जीएसटी हो गया, ये इनडायरेक्ट टैक्स है. डायरेक्ट टैक्स के अंदर क्या है, इनकम टैक्स हो गया, कॉर्पोरेशन टैक्स हो गया, ये डायरेक्ट टैक्स है. तो डायरेक्ट टैक्स इज मोर देन इनडायरेक्ट टैक्स. 25, 24, 23, 22 से लेके 25 तक डायरेक्ट टैक्स जो है वो इनडायरेक्ट टैक्स से ज्यादा रहा है. फाइनेंशियल ईयर 21, which was the year of COVID-19, the indirect tax was more than direct tax. तो इतना आपको देखना है. और आपको देखना है कि टोटल कंट्रीब्यूशन जो है वो 11.5% के आसपास रहता है, 11-11.5% के आसपास रहता है. कोई फिक्स ट्रेंड नहीं है, ऊपर नीचे हो रहा है टोटल कंट्रीब्यूशन, है ना. और इसके अंदर भी कोई फिक्स ट्रेंड नहीं है. 6 था, 6.1 हुआ, फिर 6 हो गया, फिर 6.6, 6.7. तो कोई फिक्स ट्रेंड नहीं है. ये 5% था, उससे रिड्यूस होकर 4.9% हो गया. तो टैक्स कलेक्शन एज अ परसेंटेज ऑफ जीडीपी के अंदर कोई फिक्स ट्रेंड नहीं है ना. तो इट इज इंक्रीजिंग कंसिस्टेंटली नॉर इट इज रिड्यूसिंग कंसिस्टेंटली. द ओनली ट्रेंड इज आफ्टर फाइनेंशियल ईयर 21 द डायरेक्ट टैक्स इज मोर देन इनडायरेक्ट टैक्स. दैट्स इट. पिछले 4 साल में डायरेक्ट टैक्स इज मोर देन इनडायरेक्ट टैक्स. नाउ ट्रेंड्स इन नेट रिसीट्स ऑफ द सेंटर. गवर्नमेंट के रिसीट्स होते हैं. अब नेट रिसीट्स क्या है, के अंदर हमने को नहीं लिया है, डेट को नहीं लिया है. गवर्नमेंट के रिसीट्स होते हैं, हमने देखा था रेवेन्यू रिसीट्स, उसके अंदर टैक्स था, नॉन टैक्स था. कैपिटल रिसीट्स डेट था और नॉन डेट था. तो डेट वाले को हमने नहीं लिया है. तो रेवेन्यू वाले दोनों पार्ट में है कि नॉन टैक्स रेवेन्यू एज वेल एज टैक्स रेवेन्यू दोनों ले लिए, एंड नॉन डेट कैपिटल रिसीट्स ले लिया. इन तीनों के अगर अपन शेयर को देखें कि हाईएस्ट इज नेट सेंटर्स टैक्स रेवेन्यू. जो टैक्स रेवेन्यू है वो सबसे बड़ा सोर्स है, दैट इज 26 लाख करोड़. टैक्स रेवेन्यू इज 26 लाख करोड़. और टोटल रिसीट्स के अंदर भी अगर हम बात करें तो टैक्स रेवेन्यू इज मोर देन बोरोविंग्स इटसेल्फ. क्योंकि हमने जो वो पाई चार्ट देखा था उसमें टैक्सेस सारे अलग अलग क्लासिफाइड थे. दैट पाई चार्ट द टैक्सेस वर classified in different different terms, but when you combine all the taxes these taxes become more than the borrowings. Borrowings are around 16 lakh crore, but the tax revenue of the central government is 26 lakh crore. So tax revenue is more than the borrowings. Second number is borrowings, third number is non-tax revenue, and fourth number is non-debt capital receipts. So this is how you look at this graph. You don't memorize any data, you don't memorize any figure, you just look at the trend, you just look at the ranking, and you look at the concepts कि अच्छा ये टर्म क्या है, इस टर्म का क्या मतलब है, अच्छा इस टर्म के अंदर ये नई नई चीजें क्या है, इन चीजों का क्या मतलब है. You should understand what the government is trying to tell you. तो this is what we talk about effective capital expenditure. देखिए गवर्नमेंट ऑफ इंडिया ने अलग से एक पेज दे रखा है. Still most of the people would not know कि effective capital expenditure होता क्या है. They do not even know what it is. कितना है, क्या है, बढ़ रहा है, कम हो रहा है, that is a different thing. But they don't. Most people do not even know what is effective capital expenditure of government. Now composition of expenditure we have already seen in the pie chart. This is this trend in the capital expenditure. This is effective capital expenditure. It includes capital expenditure as well as grants in aid to the for capital creation of assets, which is consistent from past many years. Apart from that, there are one or two more things that we have to look in this. This is it. So whatever was important in this document, budget at a glance, we have already seen. You also yourself download this document, budget at a glance and budget highlights. These two documents you should always download whenever there is a budget. Even after the prelims, there is going to be a new budget which can be useful in your mains preparation. At the time also, come to this site, indiabudget.gov.in, and you download budget at a glance and budget highlights, these two documents, and try to understand the story that it is trying to tell you. There is a story behind every document that the government of India presents you, and you should understand the story behind it. उसके पीछे की पूरी कहानी समझ में आनी चाहिए कि अच्छा ये बढ़ रहा है, ये कम हो रहा है, इसमें अच्छा क्या है, बुरा क्या है, what is increasing, is it a good thing or is it a bad thing, or what does it mean. गवर्नमेंट ऑफ इंडिया ने बोला इफेक्टिव कैपिटल एक्सपेंडिचर इतना बढ़ गया, पर ये इफेक्टिव कैपिटल एक्सपेंडिचर होता क्या है ये तो पता चले पहले. तो जो यूपीएससी के अंदर क्वेश्चंस बनते हैं खासकर अबाउट इकोनॉमी के अंदर, यू लुक एट द PYQs, यू अगेन गो बैक, यू इफ यू डू नॉट बिलीव मी, यू अगेन गो बैक एंड लुक एट द PYQs ऑफ इकोनॉमी. You will see out of 10, every 8 questions are conceptual in nature, 2 questions which are factual in nature. Those questions are not very difficult also. So in UPSC, if you know the concepts, the economy part of the prelims become very easy to handle. It becomes very easy to handle once you are thorough with all the concepts. It does not take much time. एक दिन 2 दिन रिवाइज कीजिए और जाके आप टेस्ट दीजिए, कोई दिक्कत ही नहीं है. पूरा इकोनॉमी आपका 1 या 2 दिन के अंदर हो सकता है. So this is why it is important whenever if you read current affairs also, read it how the UPSC asks question. UPSC के PYQs को आप अपना बेस बनाइए. PYQs जो है वही असली कहानी आपको बताएंगे. You look at the PYQs, you understand, okay, this is how UPSC frames question, and based upon that you study your current affairs also, and as well as your static. Current affairs में इतना भी डेटा होता है, लोग स्कीम्स का रट्टा मारते चले जाते हैं, इसके बेनिफिशियरीज कौन है, इसके बेनिफिशियरीज कौन है, 50 तरह की स्कीम्स रट के जाते हैं. And UPSC does not even ask a single scheme in the exam. So this is how you should prepare for prelims. So this is it from my side today. Thank you very much. आपके कोई भी डाउट्स हो तो you can ask those doubts on the comment section here. Apart from that, we will meet tomorrow same time at 12 p.m. and we will discuss about certain basic concepts of economy that were in the news in the past 1 year. Economic review और budget हो चुका है. Now we will go towards current affairs की पिछले 1 साल के अंदर जो जो न्यूज में रहा था, we will do those in our coming classes. So thank you very much. See you tomorrow.